Hey, how's it going? I want to talk today about doing DevOps slash cloud, you know, both of them engineering in different companies depending on their size. So I'm going to talk about startups, scale-ups, and also larger companies, the ones on the lower end and the huge mega companies. So let's start with startups. So I've never worked for a startup, but I have had many interviews with startups. And when I say startups, let me define that as being, let's say, I don't know, 10 people to 50 people. So startups will not typically hire cloud or DevOps engineers until they're about 10 people. The reason is because they expect the developers to sort of do deployment infrastructure as well, let's say. And actually, they probably won't have a very complicated way to deploy. So, but either way, they'll just absorb that into the developer function. So when they reach around 10 employees, typically they need their first DevOps engineer. And, you know, at the end of the day, right, DevOps engineers, we do what developers don't want to do or don't really have the time to focus on, and better give that to someone else. And that's what DevOps engineers do, right? We automate and we make the software development lifecycle go quicker. We look after site reliability, and they try to give all that to developers, but developers are rather just code. So that's what DevOps engineers are for. Now, if you come into a startup of 10 and you're the first DevOps engineer, you know, think about it, right? They won't have a huge amount of technical debt, and you'll get to really create and shape in your own vision what it should look like. They'll give you some requirements, but really it's down to you to do the research and then to build it all out. So it's a great way to learn. You'll get involved in everything in the DevOps sphere. There'll be nothing that you won't get to touch, and you won't be railroaded by kind of, oh no, you don't have permissions for that, or you know, the politics won't stop you doing what you need to do. So great place to learn and really a lot of freedom. But you know, be prepared for a bit of chaos as well. For example, you'll probably be the sole on-call person. I had an interview at a startup, and I said to the guy who was leaving the role and I was going to replace him, I said, what happens when you go on vacation and there's a production issue? I asked him, did they call you? And he said yes. So that's the kind of thing that can happen at startups. Not only can it be a bit chaotic and a bit every man or woman has to help doing a whole variety of different things, but it can also be, in my opinion, it can border on unprofessional. They don't really have a clue about process, a lot of these startups. So they kind of expect you. I've had an interview, right, where I was being asked all these weird questions as if, you know, it was like they needed a CTO or an engineering manager, or maybe they already had one, but they didn't really, you know, they were more focused on the business, and they were asking me everything technical, including things that I don't think an engineer should have to do. So yeah, you know, it was that's great if you love to expand your horizons and you really do want to get your hands dirty and get really involved. It's above your pay grade, though, I would say that. So that's the only thing. But if you want the experience, fantastic. But when I say unprofessional, there's also other things that they do that, you know, even though they have hired people from larger companies, for whatever reason, when people go into a startup, they just act differently. And maybe they're just used to the freedom and the agility that they have. But in my opinion, they will sometimes cross boundaries that they shouldn't. So be prepared for that. It's kind of just normal in a startup that it's going to be fast and furious and chaotic. But it's a great opportunity, especially if you're a junior. You can learn so much there and move on and do great things after. So the next one I want to talk about is a scale-up. So again, there's a bit of an argument, when does a startup finish and when does a scale-up start in terms of number of employees. For me, a typical scale-up is going to have about 100 to 200 employees, and that can go up to, like, let's say, I don't know, let's call it 500 or something. So by this stage, company has structure, it has different departments doing different things, And what I really like about scale-ups is that a lot of them are doing microservices. So that means that you'll get exposure to Kubernetes, because it's very popular to use Kubernetes, rightly or wrongly, but very popular to use Kubernetes for microservices. And if you don't know already, microservices is just as important, not only technical, but also non-technical. So it means if you have microservices, you can also shape your teams. You will have several product teams, and each product team will have a PO, a product owner, and then you'll have above that like a PM, a product manager, who may look after one or more product teams, and they'll be doing Scrum and Agile. So I really like working in that kind of structure. It's more structure in a startup, but it's not structure that's going to hold you back from having freedom in the way that you work. And you'll also get to do a lot of different things as a DevOps engineer, or as a some companies might split it, like you might do more cloud infra engineering, and then another team will do platform, another team may call themselves SREs or embedded DevOps or something like that. So you start to see a lot of division of role, but there's even within each of those teams or roles, there's plenty to do. It's a super interesting job, and again, like in the startup, you're not really held back by anything. You can still do whatever you want to do. It's not like in larger companies where, oh no, you can't do that. They in most scale-ups, they're starting to take seriously compliance, but a lot of them aren't already compliant. They're kind of getting there. I'm talking about like ISO 27001, SOX, all those kind of things. HIPAA, if you're in HIPAA's a bit different. Because it's very important to be health industry compliant. But there is a lot of compliance stuff that scale-ups start to really get serious about, but usually it's a journey that they're on. So again, you won't be held back. I love scale-ups. I honestly think they're one of the best places to be, and the team sizes are good. They're not so tiny that you're doing everything, or in a team of one or two, and might be difficult to discuss things. You don't really have the full diversity of opinion that you will get in a bigger team. So I think scale-ups are great, and there's still enough structure there so that it's not a wild west. So I really think that scale-ups are fantastic, and I would say that they're probably either my favorite or in my top 2 favorite company sizes. So that's a scale-up. And let me now move on to larger companies. Now, I think in theory a large company, depending on the country, is something like over a few hundred people. It might even overlap with a scale-up. But there's also the term enterprise. Well, what does that mean? It obviously means large company, but how big? What's the limit? So let me tell you, we're going to talk first of all about companies that have about 5,000 employees. So I've worked for a couple of companies like this, and what I will say is, in companies of that size, in the scale-up days, there might have been like a lot of growing pains, technical debt, all that kind of stuff. By the time they get to like 5,000 employees, it's totally different. They've gone through those growing pains. They're no longer like the teenager of a company. They're more like, let's call it, I don't know. It's like being a 30-year-old in human years, and because they're profitable, they're probably by that stage could well have be floated on the stock market and actually have shareholders that they're answerable to. They're totally legit by that stage. They shouldn't be breaking any rules or anything like that. And let's talk now in terms of engineering. They will have obviously lots and lots of different teams, and it could well be a global company as well, although it probably is the case that the headquarters is where most of the employees are going to be, and then if you look at the satellite offices in other countries, they may be quite small actually. So I've worked for these companies, and in one case, for example, the office I was in another country was quite small, and it really felt like I was working for the company culture. It felt like another country's culture. It was kind of unique like that. So that's what it's like. Now, what's it like to work in such an environment? Well, they're going to have a lot more kind of internal tooling. And so there's a lot of things that make your life easier. And the thing is, though, what you're going to find, though, with that kind of stuff is you're starting to get abstracted away from the raw. In a scale-up, right, you'll probably be doing a lot of open source and setting it up entirely from scratch. But in a larger company, let's say 5,000 employees, you're going to start using internal tooling. It may be made by a vendor, it may be completely internally developed, but it will allow some of the things that you did at the scale-up to now be abstracted away. So it starts to get a little bit different. You may still have a lot of freedom, but you're going to start finding that there's some things that you can't just choose the best tool for the job, or you can't do what you feel is right, in terms of architectural decisions, what you would prefer to deploy, this, that, or the other. It does start to get a little bit more political. Of course, it can be political in smaller companies, but it probably starts to get a bit more political, I would say, in a company of 5,000 employees. But for me, there's still plenty of freedom to be had. So I do think it's very good to work for a company of that size. You're going to start to find, though, that it's going to be you will rely more on soft skills than you did before. It's not just about hard technical skills. You're going to have to do more in the way of negotiation, managing upwards to your manager, showing your face a little bit, thinking about your reputation. You can hide, of course. It's very easy to hide when a company is larger, but that will probably count against you. You do need to fight a little bit for recognition, not just to make you feel good, but in order to make sure that you have good career opportunities. So that's very difficult. A lot of people find that really difficult to pull off. So what I will say, though, also is there's a little bit more in the way of safety, the larger companies, and that does start to kick in also even at 5,000 employees. So it's definitely an interesting company size to work at. You've got none of the kind of unprofessional crap that you would get in a startup. That's not to say people won't be unprofessional in a larger company. That can still happen, but it's quite rare, and there are more safeguards as well. There are more protections, so it's definitely a different experience. What I would say, though, is that, and I'm going to make a comparison to a huge company shortly, but it's still relatively easy to get things done, to get the job done. There aren't a whole load of frustrations, and when you do have to follow policy and procedures, for the most part, you can see that they're there with good reason. So I would say it's an enjoyable place. There is it's bigger, so there's less of a community feeling. You don't know everyone in the company anymore. But having said that, your department will be the size of the scale-up that you worked at before. So there is still that community that you get to know your most immediate neighboring co-workers, 50 to 200 or something like that. So that still exists. It's just, that you are in a department and not the whole company. So overall, I think you can enjoy a great career there. What I will say as well, though, it starts to become less DevOps, okay? In the sense, I'm not saying big companies don't have DevOps, but DevOps being that really, it's a word that means culture. It's not really a role title. And when you do see the title DevOps engineer, it typically means someone working at a startup or a scale-up that is helping to reduce the lead time for delivery of features. And that typically means that you set up all the tooling and the automation for that, but also look after site reliability. Now, when you're in a company of 5,000 employees, it is even more split out. So that kind of jack of all trades DevOps person doesn't really exist anymore. You shouldn't really see it because it's such a meaningless title. There's a better title and a more specific role and and different teams with those different roles in. So you will see more of platform engineering, cloud infra. Some people will just work in core infra, which is simply looking after the company infrastructure and nothing to do with customers. That's not really DevOps, but it does cross over to cloud, of course. You will probably see also, the larger the company, more of the exposure to Azure as opposed to, let's say, AWS or GCP. And that's only because larger companies have had enterprise agreements with Microsoft for many, many years, and it's very much more convenient for them to just run their cloud out of Microsoft as well, and also typically cheaper, at least in the beginning, that they'll get a good deal. So you're more likely to see Azure as well. So that's really all I had to say about companies that are around 5,000 people. Now let me move on to the next level for large companies. And again, there's a bit of variation here, but what I'm talking about is I'm talking about companies that are 50,000 employees, and that can go up to like almost 1 million. Some of these companies that are almost 1 million. To be fair, these companies tend to be, whether you're 50,000 or whether you're 500,000, for the most part, it's pretty similar the way they work in terms of how you can approach your career. But there are some differences with the mega company that I will explain at the end of this. But these companies, it's very, very nothing like a startup. It's taken to the next level, as you would expect. There's more in the way of policy, procedures, bureaucracy, and that type of thing. It's far more abstracted away from, a bunch of people just doing a POC with some open source tools. There's, in these bigger companies, first of all, your role will be quite narrow. I know a guy working in a big company, and all he's doing is working on observability. He's working on monitoring and etc. And that's all that he's doing, and he works for a bank. So this is a place, if you really have already made your mind up and there's something really narrow that you want to do, enterprise is the place to further your career. In general, enterprise, by the way, pays good, but not always. Some scale-ups pay better than the lower end of the enterprise market. So it's not always the case that the bigger the company, the more you get paid, but quite often it is. Of course, there's going to be other benefits as well that you will get to enjoy. There is definitely more stability in large companies that are 50,000 people and more. So I don't know. It's not like, the thing is, some people still get burned out, right? And I feel like they have to leave. Other people do get what's called being quote unquote managed out. So they don't want to leave, but their life is made difficult for them, and effectively they are forced to leave, and they look for another job and then leave. But in general, it's considered to be more stable, and you do see some people spending many, many years in these larger companies. I mean, some people job hop after like 2 years, and obviously they do that because they got a great name on their resume. But there are many people who spend a long, long time in these organizations until eventually, one day they get laid off and they're kind of institutionalized and find it a bit tough to find a new job. So it's I'm not sure I recommend that either. But in general, you get longer stints in these companies. Now, as I say, the work tends to be a lot narrower, but I think I mentioned already, it's also quite highly abstracted. Some of these companies I've gone in, this is fairly typical. You'll join, and they have a whole kind of workflow for HR that's already onboarding you in different systems and stuff. But then you'll have to do some of the work yourself, and they even have their own identity and access management portal that you have to use to get access to all the systems you need to support different teams or whatever it is in the work that you're doing. And then it'll take days or even weeks to get all the approvals. So it's not unusual in large companies, even 50,000, not even talking the mega ones, that you do not much work for the first month. So my point here is things move really slow, or they can move really slow. Not always, but they definitely in general move more slowly than you would see in a scale-up, for example, where things happen very quickly. So you have to be patient for that. And I'll give you another example. I was in a company and I needed to we were doing some work with the, kind of cloud to on-prem, and I needed to get a firewall port opened in a network segment on-prem. And it was literally taking me weeks just to get one port opened. And I had all the information, VLAN ID, and I had to fill in a form, a ridiculous form that was written in Microsoft Word. So some things you'll see are quite also archaic and old and not modern at all in some of these larger companies. And I had to fill in this frankly ridiculous form, and it took me weeks to get this anywhere closer to getting this firewall port open that I required. And it's not like a manager senior enough could just snap his fingers and make it happen. That's just not the way things happen in these large companies. Of course, if they really need to, then someone senior can do that, but they're not going to do it for my little case that I had. So yeah, it's slower. The work is a lot more abstracted away. You're going to start to see things like agile release trains, which is a way, because there are so many different teams, then they need to coordinate all these teams somehow, and that's why they have some things like release trains. You're going to see centers of excellence and stuff like that for different domains. So yeah, there's a lot of what do they call it? They call it something like they like to use this word cross-functional teams, and it's just very different ways of working. And again, the soft skills are really important, and the hard skills not so much. And one of the downsides to working like this, I would say, is, look, you can enjoy yourself and get a lot of satisfaction, but after like 3 years of doing it their way, that company's way, it can be a bit of a shock to move to another company and be like, well, wow, they do it here completely differently. Or let's say you go to a smaller company and you need to be really hands-on with the tools. You can actually find yourself being a little bit rusty because you've been doing things in an abstracted way with internal tooling, where a lot of the lower level stuff is sort of taken care of for you, and you can focus on the real value add. So it's completely different, but yeah, it's a safe environment. You can be laid off, you can be fired, but in general, it is much safer. There's more of a comfort zone. You won't be asked to do ridiculous things. So it really depends what you're looking for. Obviously, a lot of let's say older people may be more attracted to larger companies, and younger people not so much. So yeah, it's more, it's not like working for the government. It's not like, it's a slower pace, but it's not ridiculously slow, but it's definitely a slower pace, and there's a different way of working. But it's still demanding. It's not like you can be lazy and just have fun and kick back. You will find yourself being as productive in a company of 50,000 as you would in a company that is a scale up. In a startup, of course, you might be whipped like a horse, and it's completely different there. But scale up to larger company, roughly equal amount of, let's call it, effort. Now, there's an even larger company I mentioned. I called it like a mega company. So more than 50,000. I'm talking like 500,000. That kind of scale. Okay, several 100,000. We're talking here about huge banks and some of the big, I guess, I don't know, consulting companies, etc. I don't even know if there's a right word for these companies. Some of them just call themselves diversified industrial companies because they do so many different things. If you look at the top biggest companies in the world, some of them you'll never even heard of their name, and they're involved in so many different activities that there isn't even a label that you can give them. And yeah, these mega companies are, yeah, I've not worked for one, so I can't tell you from the inside what it's like. Obviously, they mostly have in common the same as even companies that are 50,000, because even 50,000 is already big enough. It's already huge, to be honest. It's massive. It's already a global company by that stage. But when you start to get to the mega size, then it's pretty similar. But the only thing that I would say is that if someone leaves a review on Glassdoor and it was an office on the other side of the world, and then they talk about what it's like, what the interview was like, what it's like working there, what the even when they seem not to be talking about people but about policies and organizational structure and those kinds of things, I think there's only so much that they can make universal across a company of that many people. And in my view, I think that these companies work in a very federated way. So like federated means that you actually split up the company into, I don't know, let's say 30 or 50 working parts, and they almost operate independently as different companies. So that's the feeling that I'm getting about companies that size. I think, look, you can't even rule a country in a completely 100% universal way. You can do that top down, you can do that to a degree, but at some point you have to federate, and you have to let individual satellite states, like in America or in other countries, it could be provinces or whatever, they have to operate with some kind of autonomy. And I get the feeling that that's what these mega companies are like. I don't know for sure. Like I said, I've never worked for one, and I'm kind of curious, but I think for the most part they're similar to even companies that are only 50,000, except for this federation aspect. So I don't know. If you've worked for one of these companies, I'd love to hear from you. You tell me. This is my own experience, my own view on working on these 4 different types of companies. Let me know what you think below, and if you like this video, well, give it a thumbs up and come back for more. Take care.